It was supposed to be a moment of unity, a carefully staged symbol of continuity in a changing monarchy. But when the palace released the latest official royal portrait, it sparked not admiration, but outrage. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was nowhere to be seen. Standing proud were King Charles, Queen Camilla, Princess Anne, and a select few others. But the most beloved royal of a generation? Erased. The media erupted, headlines demanded answers, and social media turned into a battlefield. But few understood just how calculated this omission really was. Sources now claim Camilla's private staff pushed through a last-minute alteration, removing Catherine entirely under the guise of clarity. Royal aides whisper that William was never shown the final version. He reportedly discovered the change the same time as the rest of the world, while sitting beside his wife. Camilla's inner circle brushed it off as protocol and insisted the portrait was about the enduring core of the monarchy. But behind the palace walls, the damage was done. Catherine's response was said to be quiet, composed but deeply wounded, and those closest to her described it as one of the coldest betrayals she had faced since entering royal life. What seemed like a photograph to the public was, in fact, a silent power play, a deliberate signal of who would be seen and who would be sidelined. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Because this wasn't just a snub, it was a statement. And for Catherine, it was the final straw in a long series of subtle exclusions. Camilla's grip on the royal narrative had crossed an unspoken line, and the very institution meant to protect unity now stood at the edge of an internal divide. What came next was not just outrage, it was rebellion, beginning quietly but growing louder with every passing hour. The public demanded answers, but within the palace, a very different storm was rising. One that would see Camilla's quiet dominance questioned and her access to the most private corners of royal life pushed to its limit. But if the public saw a calculated image, what they didn't see was the private backlash brewing behind palace walls, a reckoning that would soon upend Camilla's place in the family. Less than 24 hours after the portrait was unveiled to the world, the palace corridors echoed with footsteps not of ceremony but of crisis. Behind closed doors, senior royals gathered in what sources now call the most volatile family meeting since the days of the Sussex fallout. But this time, the target wasn't an outsider. It was Camilla, and the accusations came not from tabloids, but from within the family itself. William, red with disbelief, allegedly stood before both his father and stepmother, demanding to know how such a decision had been made without his knowledge. How the woman who had carried the weight of the crown's future had been erased without warning. The room, insiders say, was thick with silence until Princess Anne, stoic and rarely one to raise her voice, broke ranks. She reportedly called the exclusion an insult, not just to Catherine, but to the entire line of succession. Charles, ever the strategist, tried to diffuse the situation with appeals to public messaging and royal tone, but Camilla held firm. According to multiple aides, she refused to apologize, insisting the portrait was meant to showcase monarchical strength, not sentimental attachments. Her words only deepened the divide. Prince Edward, usually the quiet peacemaker, attempted to interject, to mediate, to soften, but was quickly overshadowed by rising voices. What began as a discussion turned to a confrontation, and what was meant to be a simple PR meeting transformed into a brutal reckoning. Charles and William clashed not just over a portrait, but over principle, over the direction of the crown, over who truly held sway in the palace's inner circle. The end result? A decision that sent a thunderous message throughout the monarchy. Camilla would not be included in the next private family photo session. No formal statement, no public retraction, but the ban was clear. And within the palace, it was a blow that struck far deeper than any headline. Camilla, once shielded by Charles's unwavering loyalty, found herself facing a line she could no longer cross. Her authority, once quiet but absolute, had met its first immovable resistance. And behind the fury and formality, one truth rang louder than ever: Catherine was no longer just a future queen consort. She was the unshakable heart of a fractured royal family. But this confrontation wasn't just about one photograph. It exposed a long-buried rift that had been quietly growing between Camilla and Catherine for years. To the public eye, Catherine and Camilla presented a picture of unity, two royal women, each playing their part in the grand machinery of monarchy. But beneath the pearls and polished smiles, something far colder was at play. The seeds of quiet rivalry were sown years earlier, long before Catherine was even a mother, when she first entered royal life with grace, popularity, and a natural connection with the public that many privately said outshone even Charles and Camilla. From the very start, whispers circulated that Camilla saw her not as an ally but as a threat. Sources close to former palace aides recall subtle interventions, changes in seating arrangements, cancelled joint appearances, even adjustments to protocol that made it clear Catherine's presence would not eclipse Camilla's. Behind the scenes, it was Camilla reportedly who urged Charles to keep matters of succession strictly defined, arguing that tradition, not popularity, must steer the crown's future. Catherine, by contrast, envisioned something more progressive, a monarchy built on transparency, compassion, and genuine connection with the people. These opposing visions created a quiet, persistent friction. Over the years, events emerged where Catherine was visibly sidelined, left off key announcements, excluded from intimate royal planning sessions, or notably missing from private family retreats. Camilla's influence, palace watchers say, extended deep into Charles's inner circle. And with each instance, Catherine was forced to swallow her pride, stand beside the woman who quietly chipped away at her standing, and remain silent for the sake of unity. But silence does not mean ignorance. Former staff who've since left their posts describe Catherine's pain as measured but unshakable, the kind that builds slowly beneath the surface. They claim she knew, even then, that her every move was being watched not only by the public but by Camilla, who saw the future queen in waiting as a shadow, looming ever closer. What made this even more complex was Charles's position. Torn between loyalty to his wife and his responsibility to the next generation, he often chose the path of least resistance. But those decisions, time and again, placed Catherine in the role of the outsider within her own family. And now, with this latest scandal, the portrait, the exclusion, the fallout, it wasn't just personal, it was historical. A culmination of unspoken tension finally breaking through the polished facade. And this time, Catherine wasn't standing alone. She had a force behind her that neither Camilla nor the crown could have anticipated. But just as history threatened to repeat itself, the public stepped in, turning this private betrayal into a national outcry. The backlash was instant and fierce. As the official portrait circulated through every major network and publication, the digital realm exploded in protest. Within hours, hashtags like #WhereIsCatherine and #QueenInWaiting flooded timelines across the globe, transforming what might have been dismissed as an internal oversight into a full-blown cultural reckoning. This wasn't just about a missing face in a photograph, it was about what that omission symbolized. A deliberate act of exclusion, a rewriting of narrative, and for many, a final insult to a woman who had carried the burden of duty with unwavering grace. Social media accounts with millions of followers began reposting images of Catherine through the years, smiling in hospital wards, kneeling with children, standing beside veterans, each captioned with fury, heartbreak, and fierce loyalty. Commentators from all sides of the political spectrum joined in. Royal correspondents who had once walked a careful line between reverence and restraint broke rank. Calculated erasure, some called it. Others labelled it a royal miscalculation of historic proportions. British newspapers were suddenly split between two camps, those scrambling to minimise the fallout and those doubling down on the call for justice. Editorials began to emerge, written with uncharacteristic sharpness, asking the questions that had long been whispered behind palace curtains. Why is Catherine being pushed to the margins? Who benefits from her silence? And how long will the institution allow this quiet dismantling of her public role to continue? And yet, in the eye of the storm, Catherine said nothing. Her silence, however, only amplified the power of the moment. It became a canvas onto which millions projected their frustration, empathy, and defiance. Former palace staff began issuing statements, some anonymous, others bold and named, painting Catherine as a woman of resolve who had endured years of being outmaneuvered behind the scenes. They praised her devotion, her integrity, her dignity under fire. More than once, these statements hinted that this wasn't the first time Camilla had tried to undercut her, but it was the first time the world noticed. Public pressure mounted, and with it, calls for King Charles to step forward. Not as a father-in-law, not as a husband, but as a monarch. Would he stand up for the woman who many now called the true queen in waiting, or would he remain complicit in what was rapidly becoming a scandal of generational magnitude? Behind the fervour, something deeper stirred a realization that the public's relationship with the monarchy had shifted. No longer passive observers, the people were now participants in defining who deserved the crown's legacy. And in that collective cry, one truth became deafening. Catherine had become more than a princess. She had become a symbol of grace, of resilience, and of a monarchy the public still wanted to believe in. But while the public took to the streets and screens, a different kind of reckoning was taking shape behind palace gates, one that would rewrite Camilla's place in royal history. It wasn't announced with press releases or public statements, but within palace circles, it was seismic. Camilla, once considered the family matriarch, was banned from participating in the next private family photo session, and for the first time, the Queen Consort found herself on the outside. The decision, delivered in hushed tones behind closed doors, sent shockwaves through the inner sanctum of the monarchy. Sources say it was not made lightly. King Charles, visibly conflicted, reluctantly agreed after a series of tense discussions with senior royals. For months, palace aides had walked a tightrope, attempting to balance public perception with internal loyalties. But the fallout from the portrait scandal had made neutrality impossible. Catherine's exclusion had wounded not only public trust, but the very fabric of familial unity. Now, there was no walking it back. The upcoming private family shoot, an annual tradition capturing the royal bloodline in its most intimate form, would proceed without Camilla. And the weight of that absence would speak louder than any official correction. Behind the scenes, chaos erupted. Senior aides scrambled to re-coordinate the event, reshuffling schedules, messaging, and even location to avoid further leaks. Camilla, sources say, was livid. She reportedly referred to the decision as a humiliation, warning that it would only fuel tabloid frenzy and embolden Catherine's supporters. But her fury fell on deaf ears. Princess Anne, long considered the stoic compass of the family, was reportedly firm in her stance, backing the decision with quiet authority. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, echoed Anne's view, emphasizing the importance of healing optics for the sake of public unity. The symbolism mattered, and so did the silence that followed. Catherine, though allegedly hesitant about the move, aware of how it might deepen the rift, chose to say nothing. Her restraint, once seen as passivity, was now interpreted as strength. She didn't demand the exclusion. She didn't push for revenge. She simply allowed the tides of consequence to run their course, and in doing so cemented a powerful message. True authority doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. The atmosphere inside the palace shifted. Longtime insiders described the moment as a tipping point in royal dynamics, a reckoning that quietly redefined who held real influence behind the scenes. For years, Camilla had maneuvered with cunning precision, embedding allies and asserting control over ceremonial traditions. But now, that influence was cracking, not because of rebellion, but because of gravity. The kind of gravity Catherine had earned through pain, grace, and relentless composure. And as preparations for the new family portrait began, absent one of its most senior figures, the message was clear. This was no longer Camilla's monarchy to shape. It was no longer her image that would define legacy. That crown of quiet command had passed without declaration, without coronation, into the hands of the woman the world now watched with reverence. But the consequences didn't stop there. What followed was a series of quiet but unmistakable moves that signaled a shift in power within the monarchy. With Camilla pulled from the spotlight, a new figure emerged to fill the vacuum, and she did it without uttering a single word. Catherine, in her quiet strength, became the image of the monarchy the public now craved. Graceful, modern, and unshakably resilient. No grand pronouncements, no strategic leaks, just presence controlled, calm, and commanding. Within days of the private portrait ban, Catherine began appearing at major royal engagements alone, and something shifted. Crowds gathered earlier, cheers rang louder, and camera lenses lingered just a little longer. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. While the palace remained silent on the internal shake-up, the public had already cast their vote not with ballots, but with adoration. Every headline, every image of Catherine standing tall reinforced the message: this was the face of the future. And not because she fought for it, but because she simply embodied it. The engagements were not insignificant. From charity visits to diplomatic receptions, Catherine's solo appearances carried the full weight of royal continuity. But what caught insiders off guard wasn't just the public reception, it was how seamlessly she moved into a leadership space behind palace walls. Senior staff began noting her influence on decisions typically reserved for the sovereign's inner circle. Conversations once filtered through, William now included Catherine directly. Her instincts, honed by years of silent endurance, proved valuable, not just in image but in strategy. Foreign dignitaries, some reportedly bypassing traditional channels, began requesting meetings with her. One senior aide reportedly said, "She's become the monarchy's greatest diplomatic asset without even trying." It was a subtle shift, but profound. Catherine was no longer just fulfilling royal duty, she was shaping it. And while the public hailed her composure as dignity in action, the contrast with Camilla's absence only grew starker. High-profile events came and went, with Camilla nowhere in sight. No explanation, no statements. The silence became deafening. Some whispered health concerns, others suspected internal sanctions. But the most compelling theory was also the most simple: Camilla had been strategically sidelined. Whether by Charles, the advisors, or through her own retreat, she had disappeared from the frame she once tried to control. And into that void, Catherine stepped not with ambition, but with unshakable resolve. She didn't need to say, "I belong here." The nation had already decided for her. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about enduring, about becoming. But while Catherine rose through grace, Camilla's circle plotted in silence, refusing to go down without a fight. Determined not to be erased, Camilla began orchestrating her countermove. Leaks to friendly media outlets, quiet meetings with advisors, and sudden appearances at unexpected events. But each move only deepened the public divide and revealed just how far she'd fallen. What started as a subtle PR push quickly unraveled into a campaign of desperation. Carefully planted stories painted her as the misunderstood queen, a woman weathering a storm she never intended to cause. The narrative was simple. Camilla had been scapegoated, her intentions twisted, her legacy tarnished by misinterpretation. But the public wasn't buying it. The timing felt manufactured, the tone hollow. And, in a digital age where authenticity reigns supreme, Camilla's maneuvers read more like damage control than redemption. Behind the palace gates, whispers grew louder. Staff, who once operated loyally under Camilla's guidance, reportedly shifted their allegiance. The energy within the royal machine was different, cooler toward Camilla, warmer toward Catherine. And that shift wasn't lost on Charles. Caught between his wife and his heir, he reportedly pleaded for calm, urging Camilla to let the scandal pass. But Camilla, unwilling to fade quietly into the background, insisted on reclaiming ground she believed she still deserved. Her sudden presence at charity engagements, once applauded, was now met with thin applause, or worse, complete indifference. The magic had faded. The narrative had changed. And Camilla was no longer the symbol of royal perseverance. She was now, in the eyes of many, the architect of a crisis. One event marked the tipping point. A scheduled appearance at a long-standing royal charity was meant to soften her image, to remind the public of her years of patronage. Instead, it ended in humiliation. A small crowd gathered, and as Camilla stepped forward, a smattering of boos cut through the silence. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, but it was undeniable. The moment, captured on smartphones, spread across social media within hours, became a symbol of the disconnect between the monarchy and its people, a disconnect Camilla now personified. Even Charles, sources say, was shaken. He had once fought so hard to legitimize her place beside him. Now, he watched as that place dissolved with each passing headline, each awkward public outing, each moment where the Queen Consort title seemed more honorary than real. And while Camilla scrambled to steady her footing, Catherine remained still, strategic in her silence, powerful in her presence. She didn't need rebuttals or rebuttals. The contrast was its own statement. And within the palace, it was increasingly clear who the future truly belonged to. As the tide turned completely against her, Camilla faced the reality of her new role, while Catherine prepared for the next quiet revolution. Weeks after the scandal began, a new portrait was unveiled, this time, by surprise, and with no press fanfare. At its center, Catherine, flanked by her children and William. No royal titles, no grand setting, just a moment of unity, captured in quiet defiance of everything that came before. The release was deliberate in its understatement. No dramatic headlines, no orchestrated media campaign. It came not from Buckingham Palace, but from Kensington, where Catherine and William have long built their own narrative, one rooted not in hierarchy but in humanity. And that is exactly what this portrait reflected. A family, not a throne. A bond, not a crown. The absence of Camilla and Charles wasn't just noticeable, it was deafening. The image made no attempt to bridge the rift. It stood as a declaration. The future was no longer defined by those at the top, but by those who had quietly earned the public's trust. Within hours, the photo had circled the globe. News outlets called it the moment everything changed. Social media platforms exploded with praise, calling the image the true face of the modern monarchy. Catherine didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Every detail, from the timing to the setting, was intentional, a direct response to the chaos that had consumed the monarchy. A visual reclaiming of the narrative, told not through retaliation, but through grace. For royal watchers, it marked the start of something profound, a reset not just in protocol, but in power. This wasn't a continuation of tradition. It was the quiet beginning of a new chapter, one shaped not by entitlement or legacy, but by resilience, empathy, and earned respect. Even critics of the monarchy paused. The portrait transcended symbolism. It captured the beating heart of what the crown had always promised, but often failed to deliver: stability, dignity, and a sense of belonging. In that still moment, Catherine achieved what palace spin doctors and decades of reinvention could not. She humanized the monarchy, and in doing so, she became something more than a figurehead. She became a mirror to the people's hope for what royalty should mean in a fractured world. The message was as simple as it was profound. You don't inherit trust, you build it, image by image, choice by choice, silence by strength. But even as Catherine stood tall in the image that rewrote royal history, one final moment brought everything full circle and left the monarchy forever changed. At a private memorial for Queen Elizabeth, both Camilla and Catherine attended but never once stood side by side. The divide was visible, irreversible, and symbolic of a crown now split between tradition and transformation. What was meant to be a unifying tribute to a monarch who embodied continuity instead exposed the raw fractures that had been festering within the royal family. The whispers began long before the service even started. Tension between the two women's teams was reportedly so high that aides from opposing camps refused to share logistics. The seating chart, usually a formality, became a battlefield. In the end, Catherine and Camilla were placed on opposite ends of the chapel, a silent yet thunderous symbol that unity was no longer the illusion the palace could sell. The Queen was gone, but her absence had unearthed more than grief. It had forced the royals to confront what her legacy truly meant, and who had the right to carry it forward. Observers noted the choreography of glances, or lack thereof. Charles, visibly strained, avoided eye contact with both women. He sat stiff, expression unreadable, but insiders say the pressure of choosing between the past and the future had become unbearable. The moment the service ended, press headlines wasted no time. "A house divided," they read. "Catherine and Camilla, a royal rift on display." But behind the scenes, it wasn't just optics. It was about power. William, increasingly confident, reportedly told senior staffers afterward, "The future is already here." That simple phrase echoed like a drumbeat across the institution. No longer just the Duke of Cambridge, William was stepping into the arena, not as a passive heir but as a man defending the woman who had borne the worst of the monarchy's storms and emerged unbroken. Camilla, once poised to shape the royal narrative, now watched as it slipped through her fingers. Her presence at the memorial was noted, but her absence in public affection was louder. There were no chants for her, no headlines praising her poise. The era of deference was ending, and the people had chosen a new symbol for the crown's evolution. Catherine, standing quietly with her children, exuded the very strength the monarchy needed to survive. Composure without coldness, elegance without elitism, and duty without manipulation. She didn't challenge the system with rebellion, but with grace so unwavering it became its own revolution. From exclusion to ascension, Catherine's journey is a reminder that royalty isn't about titles, it's about presence, principle, and persistence. And in the silent war of images and influence, it is she who now defines the face of the monarchy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.